Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 4, and today I'm here with my friend Pam Laricchia talking about deschooling. Pam is a longtime unschooling mom whose 3 children left school back in 2002. She loves exploring unschooling and sharing the fascinating things she's discovered about learning and parenting along the way through her books, podcast, and website. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. If you are loving the Sage Family Podcast, then become a part of it through Patreon, where you can support these important conversations, help make this show great, and get rewards doing it. Now it's time for the adventure of the week. This week we spent hours at Pump It Up, which is a giant indoor warehouse filled with inflatable bounce houses, slides, and obstacle courses. As usual, we met up with old friends and new, and the kids all had so much fun going berserk together. One of the families threw a pile of inflatable swords into the mix, and the mayhem and boisterous laughter was perfect. The parents were requested to attempt to invade their castles repeatedly, and I can proudly say I made it across the wipeout balls, and you should definitely Google that if you've never seen it. Today, my friend Pam is sitting down with us to talk about deschooling. Pam first entered my life when I walked away from traditional public school with my firstborn and dove headfirst into learning everything I could about this homeschooling path and stumbled upon her writing. Then when we took off on our big adventure to move from Southern California to the Pacific Northwest, her Exploring Unschooling podcast was our soundtrack. On all our long drives through gorgeous new nature to fun new experiences, her voice was a big part of our inspiration. She is a seminal voice in the natural learning movement, and I am so honored to connect with her in conversation on the Sage Family Podcast. Now, I'm hoping you'll share your story with us, Pam. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What about your relationships in life fulfill you? What is your relationship to this topic?
Oh, that's so cool. And thank you so much for inviting me, Rachel. I'm really excited to chat about this. Now, for me, I guess I am a pretty strong systems thinker who's insatiably curious and follows the joy, because that's where I find the most fun and the most stretching and learning. I'm passionate about my family, about unschooling, and about stories. I've been married for 26 years, and we have 3 children who are now all in their 20s.
Woohoo, and everyone survived.
Yay! Surprise! And to me, what I find so fulfilling about our relationships is the connection that we've cultivated over the years and the open communication that it continues to inspire. They are amazing human beings, and I continue to learn so much from them. That was such a big piece. And deschooling is what brought our family to this great place, so I'm forever grateful for it.
Yes. Well, deschooling is the first chapter of my Sage Homeschooling book because it really is step 1 when we're talking about stepping off the mainstream path and wading into this wonderful world of natural learning. Unpacking all of my educational baggage has been by far the hardest aspect of my end of the unschooling journey. So why don't you explain what we're talking about when we say deschooling?
It's so true, really. Deschooling is the transition to unschooling. It's the process of, revisiting, like you said, so much of that conventional wisdom around learning and parenting that we absorbed growing up. We ask ourselves, does this really make sense to us? We look in our lives and look at our children. Does it really make sense? And soon I know I did. I'm sure you did. We realized just how deeply that schoolish mindset has permeated our lives, right?
Yes.
And as we start to remove those school filters, we begin to see how learning truly weaves its way through our days and through our lives. The learning really is in the living. So deschooling is definitely scary, but it's also so exciting with countless aha moments and so many beautiful shifts in our relationships with our children. I just had no idea when I first started where we could go.
Yeah. Like question everything and be brave.
Yes, beautiful.
Well, I invited you to join me here and you said yes, but then you said, oh, hey, by the way, my new book is launching and sent me a copy. And Pam, it's incredible. I have what I call my natural learning canon, and this is now officially book number 1 in the Unschooling Uncurriculum. So I'm hoping I can convince you to let me give away a copy of your new book when it's ready. First, I'm just going to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
Yay! So we define who we are and how we see the world through an internal process of giving meaning to our experiences through the writing of our story or narrative. This is actually a central piece to the therapeutic modality that I used to practice therapy. Your book, you've taken the deschooling process and framed it in the context of the hero's journey. And in reading your book, I have completely reinterpreted my own story in a tremendously meaningful way. So will you explain what I mean when I say that you overlaid the literary hero monomyth onto deschooling?
Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So Joseph Campbell was an avid mythologist, and he spent years collecting and analyzing countless stories from around the world, culminating in his most popular work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was published in 1949. And in that book, he explains the underlying pattern that he found at the heart of stories from across all cultures and eras, and he called it the monomyth. So that's the general sequence of events that outlines the hero's journey. Basically, the monomyth of the hero describes an individual who somehow stumbles upon clues to a truth that lies outside of conventional belief and begins a quest, physical or spiritual, to understand and eventually embody that truth as their new way of life. So remember earlier when I mentioned that I love stories? Yeah, I came across the hero's journey because it's a well-known framework in the world of story. And as I came across references to his work over the years, I began to notice connections between the hero's journey and the experiences that I had had on my journey as an unschooling parent. And that really fascinated me. And the deeper I looked at the hero's journey, the stronger the connections to my unschooling journey became. What I love so much is that Campbell looked at an incredible range of myths and legends, and the pattern he unearthed is fundamental to being human in the world. It transcends culture and era. I mean, he wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949. Yeah. And I see the same patterns in my life and my unschooling journey right now in 2018. It's just so cool, I think.
It is. Well, and that quote, be the hero of your own story, is one of my favorite quotes. And this book is basically walking us through that process in the context of deschooling. It's being the hero of your own story, which I just love so, so much. So thank you for writing it.
I'm glad you liked it.
So you talk about embracing the beginner's mind, which is that mindset of bravely questioning everything and holding a default position of curiosity. How is that an essential step on the deschooling process?
I love that question because at the beginning of our deschooling journey, we think, rightly so, that a lot of what we already know is going to be helpful for us. Yeah. So even
the opposite.
Shh, spoilers.
Sorry.
So even though we get that unschooling is an unconventional choice, that kids aren't going to go to school, we really are in the dark at this point about how many of our assumptions around learning and parenting and childhood and relationships that we're going to be revisiting. So embracing the concept of beginner's mind is a great way to help ourselves release what you were talking about, that conventional baggage that we've collected over the years, so that we can look at the world through fresh eyes with curiosity and wonder. It's like the ultimate learning mindset. Now, young children naturally embody beginner's mind. They're so curious. They're always asking questions and exploring things to figure them out. When you look at children, they're so light and free and they're incredible learners. And so that is a great way for us to approach this deschooling process as open-minded, curious learners with no preconceived ideas to weigh us down or misdirect us.
Yeah, that's so essential. Often when people, I have found, our first, I know you describe it in different language in the book, but our first sort of like triggered or inspired to start looking into other ways. At first, they're holding very tightly to all of their beliefs. It's like a security blanket of like, well, these are the things I know to be true, and then I know about the world, and then I know about myself. And so sort of some of the work that I often find that I'm doing early on is emboldening them to be brave enough to put all of those things down. Because before you can build yourself up anew, you have to break yourself down.
That's such a great point, because at first, if you try to keep that and try to fit new pieces in, it's so much harder. Exactly. Yeah. You're not going to, you can twist that piece around in so many different ways, but you're just not going to make it fit into your existing.
You haven't removed any puzzle pieces. You're not going to be able to fit any new ones.
Yeah, great. So, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
I love how you talk about that beginner's mind, because that really is essential. Now, the timing was just perfect too, because in episode 2 of this podcast, I was talking with Joe Watt about our role as unschooling mothers. And I said the word that resonated with me was guide, which is reciprocal. Then through the lens of the hero's journey, you really emphasized the role of guide that our children hold for us. And I couldn't agree more. So can you speak to the role of our children and other people in our lives on our deschooling process?
Oh, absolutely. I love that. My children really, really were my guides on this journey. Every time I looked back and thought about it, they were there. They were there. The beautiful thing is they didn't have years of conventional messaging weighing them down, right? So they had a beautifully fresh perspective on things right from the start. Even my eldest, who was in school until he was almost 10, he led me on this journey in the first place because he wasn't going to take those conventional messages on as his own. So that was kind of my inspiration at first. And then once I was in an open and learning mindset, I learned so much through watching them in action and engaging with them as they went about their days, doing all the things that they wanted to do. I saw them learning things all the time without any teaching happening around them. What? I saw them learning things that in curricula would be found in a wide range of grades, which helped me realize that learning things at certain ages is all about managing the schooling process, not about how learning happens. Mm-hmm. I saw learning that used to be hard for them when they were in school come so much more easily within the context of their interests. So I realized it wasn't the learning itself that was hard. What was hard was having to learn something you're not interested in.
When you may not be ready to learn it.
Exactly. And you know what? Just watching them, I saw how capable they truly were. They were capable of doing things, of making choices, of changing their minds for real reasons, of working through things. I mean, it's incredible how little we think of children. But until you step back and watch them in action, in their process, in their time, it's amazing what you see. As for other people, there were also some people along the way who played the role of ally, like the more experienced unschooling parents who were sharing their stories and insights and helped me dig into my questions. So that was a really helpful piece of my journey. And you know what? Looking back, I think it can be helpful to see family and friends who were less supportive of our choice to take the kids out of school as maybe playing the role of threshold guardian, because it turns out they can serve a useful purpose in our story, one of testing our resolve to undertake this journey, because this journey isn't easy. It will take real work. And if you're going to get really off put every time a little something comes up, it's going to be even more challenging.
Yeah.
So lots of fun roles in there, right?
Yeah. Well, when we were first making the shift from traditional public schooling to homeschooling, we went through our school district and we took my child's books and just school at home. Like I think I remember reading that you sort of had a same process. And one of the pivotal moments when my kids were guides for me was when I had my child sitting at a desk and we were doing this science test about states of matter from the science textbook. And my kids were just so over like sitting at this desk. So I said, okay, let's go to we had this nature preserve across the street. Let's go across the street and we'll go for a walk. So we're going through this like little hike on this trail and my kids are just like running everywhere, just exploding with interest and enthusiasm. And one of my kids sees this black lizard on this tree. And all of a sudden, all of the kids stop and there's this whole amazing conversation that erupts over why is this lizard black? And I said, well, look around and notice the colors of the trees. And they were saying, well, talking about how they were unusually black. There had been a fire a couple of years before. And so we got into this whole amazing conversation about natural selection and evolution and forest health and animal adaptations and all this stuff. And then when we got back to the house and my kid was supposed to sit back down and go back into this test into which they were learning absolutely nothing. It was like one of those pivotal moments where I realized like, okay, so this is not how human beings learn. Like I need to dig more into this because my kid just learned so much from this walk that we took, where all of the learning followed their own interests and what was relevant for them. And we just tackled like 20 different things that would be covered in, like you said, in a variety of grades and a variety of different subject headings. And it was fun and we loved it. And there's an inconsistency here there's a dissonance that I need to dig deeper underneath.
Oh, I love that word distance. And that's such a great observation. That's what I found the same thing too, right? I was trying to pull them away from their play to come do a little bit of workbook work.
Yes. Yes.
It was like saying, stop learning and come over here and learn.
Oh, yes. I talk about several of those in my Sage Homeschooling book because looking back on them, it's so obvious, like, duh. You know, as I'm watching them engage in these amazing experiences and learning so much. And I have this instinct, and it's part of my deschooling process, where I would have this voice like try to jump out of my mouth and say like, stop doing these amazing self-driven projects and come sit down and fill out a worksheet. And I would catch it and, and say, just observe them and see what you can learn about what's happening naturally on its own. And that was a big part of my deschooling process, just letting them be my guides.
Oh, I know. And time is such a big part of that, right? To just give them the time so that you can watch them in action. You need enough time to be able to see the connections as they go about their day, right? Yes. To see them learning something as they're doing something over here, and then a few days or even weeks later, seeing them incorporate that into something else they're doing.
Yes.
Right? If you just take a little snapshot, it's like, okay, yeah, they learned that, but they could learn that with a book too. But no.
And see how they all connect over time. And there's this like web of understanding that gets woven.
Exactly.
When I'm doing homeschool coaching with families, one of the things I tell them is, as they come with this schooly mindset is, I need you to be a scientist for a couple of weeks. And I want you to just observe. Like see what can you see? What can you hear? What can you feel? Like just rise above it. Don't be a part of it and just sit back and observe. And jot down all of your notes and see what kind of conclusions you can come up with. Try and, we can figure out the meaning together. We'll assign it meaning together, but just be a scientist first and observe. And that process is really powerful and eye-opening. And that's sort of this process of shifting their mindset to their children being their guides.
Exactly. And it's so beautiful and incredible.
Yeah. So you lay out some truths that we come to accept through a process of shifting. And I'm hoping you will touch on those, which really are universal to the evolution of this connected, respectful, collaborative relationships with our children, and this trusting, intuitive, experience-based, self-directed learning lifestyle.
Yeah, I ended up, that was one stage that I broke out from the hero's journey. He calls it the road of trials. And for me, through my unschooling journey, there were two really large aspects. There was the aspect of learning, and then there was the aspect of parenting, the aspect of our relationships with our children to support that learning. So I'll just quickly go through some of the truths that they may be different for other people too. It really, because it's so unique. Each person's journey is unique. And that's what I love. I mean, right there in the title, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, right?
Yeah, it looks different.
There's exactly. It looks different for so many different people. But one of the big truths that I touched on it before is that teaching is not necessary for learning. And we are just so used. That's one of those schoolish filters that we have, right? That for somebody to learn something, somebody else has got to teach them how to do it. Yeah. That we lived that for our entire school career, right? So it's hard. That can be a hard one for people to let go. The curriculum is not necessary. That's another thing. Well, if we don't teach them these things, how are they going to learn it? What if they miss something? Something essential. So gaps, exactly. There's just so much richness in exploring each of these questions, right? Mm-hmm. If you're learning in the real world and your goal is, when you think about school, they're laying out a curriculum so that you can learn the things that they feel you need to know to be a functioning adult in society, right? When you graduate out of school, then you're in the real world, right? Even they call it, get out in the real world, you're going to need to know this. Mm-hmm. But, if you're already living in the real world and exploring and going about your day, you're going to come across situations where that piece of information or that skill is of value to you, and you're going to pick it up.
Isn't that so backwards that school talks about so much about that it exists to prepare our children for the real world when they could just live in the real world now. And
it's right there.
It's all around us.
I know. I kind of love that little switch, flipping it on its head, because I think that often helps people go oh, hey, school has its purpose, what it's trying to accomplish. But hey, there are other ways to accomplish that. Learning is fun. Oh my gosh, this is children as guides in a nutshell. You watch your kids doing the things that they enjoy doing and pursuing their interests and goals. Learning is fun for them, even when it's hard, right? Even when they have to push through, even when they get frustrated, they keep going and they celebrate at the end, and they're having fun along the way. And that ties into, as well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, learning is not hard, right? Even when they're determined, that doesn't stop them, right? Because they are deep into the flow of whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, right? Mm-hmm. What's hard is if you try to pull them out of that and teach them something completely unrelated.
Something completely irrelevant to them.
Yeah, that really is hard because, learning is about connecting things so you can understand something, right? How does it fit into the world? How am I going to use this? Those are fundamental questions to learning something because you need to connect it and make sense of it.
You have to have a place in your mind for that understanding to go. And those spaces in your mind, you become aware of them by living your life. So you stumble upon something, and all of a sudden, through this experience you've had, you notice that there's this space, and you are self-driven through curiosity to play with it, to have fun with it. And through that play, you fill in that gap of understanding. And then it connects to all of these other things in your mind.
And your understanding of the world grows.
Yes.
I love there's a quote, and I won't remember it offhand, but it is about how what we're lacking nowadays is wisdom, because we keep stuffing children's heads with facts, right? It's all about facts and regurgitating those facts, memorizing those facts, but so little time is spent on how they're connected. Like even just dividing school into subjects, right? You're missing so many connections. There's so much knowledge and wisdom that's missed when you focus on just little individual facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And it's hard when to a poor child who's just got covered, getting hit with 30 facts that they need to memorize that have no connection to the rest of their world. It is hard. Learning that way is hard, but that doesn't mean learning itself is hard.
Yes.
It means learning in school can be hard.
Yes.
So I guess we better move on to the parenting truth. And for me, parenting, the way I thought of it or think of it is as a shift from control to connection. So many conventional parenting wisdom and advice is all about adults versus children, and adults controlling children to do what they think is right. That's just the way we think we should be raising children. But really, parenting does not need to be adults versus children.
No. I'm just going to say that the whole podcast. I'm going to sit here nodding, be like, yeah, no, yeah.
Just keep saying that in the back of your mind as you listen to everything. It is not adults versus children. As I touched on earlier, children absolutely are capable of making choices. Another unique truth that I had no idea before I started really was that fair doesn't mean equal. Again, here we are back to children as guides. When I started really watching my children as the unique individuals that they are, I realized they needed different things from me, right? I didn't need to be fair as in equal, that I needed to spend a half an hour a day one-on-one with each of them.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to get me a strong, connected, trusting relationship with them. Sometimes one of them needed more of me. Sometimes they were deeply engrossed in what they were doing for days, maybe weeks on end, and they didn't need a lot of connection with me. So once I stopped measuring things between them in terms of being equal and just treated them as the interesting individuals that they were, oh my gosh, our relationships blossomed.
Yes, because everyone's needs are different.
Exactly. And when you're watching your kids and you're understanding what their individual needs are, and then you spend your time and effort meeting those, it's incredible.
Yeah, like my youngest would need more like boisterous hugging type attention while I'm engaging in a conversation with my oldest, who needs lots of conversation. And I don't need to like give one kid a hug and then give another kid a hug, or someone's feeling deprived. Like their needs their needs are different, and that means time and attention and all in learning style. To just honor those natural differences.
And that flows when you're stepping away from that adults versus children, right? Because now all of a sudden you're not thinking them as children. I'm thinking them as Joseph, Lizzie, and Michael.
Yes, whole human beings. It's like radical, I know. Not property for you to act upon.
Exactly. You're not trying to mold them into something. Yeah, we could go on and on forever. Another big thing for me was realizing that quitting was not a failure. This was another big parenting shift for me, because you want your kids to be determined. You want them to follow through. You want them to have grit, all that kind of lovely, juicy stuff.
Yes.
And we think that quitting means that they don't have this. But really, quitting is so much learning about themselves, so much learning about what they like, what they don't like. It helps them start to hone in on the things that they will enjoy and love so much, that they will be determined to see it through, that they will just keep going until they figure it out. And for us to try to think that we can teach that is wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us have so much shame baggage around the word quitting. And so sometimes when I'm working with families, I have to reframe it with words like pivoting or redirecting, changing directions. Like as an adult, I often pivot, or I often change directions, redirect my energies. If I feel like something isn't a good fit for me, I can pivot. And people seem to be completely on board with those words. And in that context, it makes total sense to them. And then I might introduce back into the fold, you might be able to describe leaving this focus and shifting to a different focus with the word quitting. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, I'm wondering if we can change your relationship to that word, because that is a healthy tool to have in your tool bag. Like, if as an adult you've ever changed jobs, I mean, sometimes that is the healthy choice, and that is the choice that allows you to grow more into your authentic best self.
And I love digging into that, because you know what you find on your journey is the things that you're learning through watching your children, you're applying to yourself. Because you know what, growing up, like, imagine, I went to school, I got my degree, I became an engineer, I worked as an engineer for 10 years. It was a big thing for me to choose to quit that and stay home, right? So, that word has so much baggage for us. And to see our children using that concept so beautifully and correctly to continue their life journey, their learning journey, however you want to describe it, is just amazing. And it helps you realize, I can do that for me too.
Yeah, and without ego. Like when I've completed my curriculum and had my degrees, and all of my peers were going into like agency work or private practice work, I was having my babies and still passionately driven to help families in a similar vein that I didn't even think of it as quitting. And I think part of that is like the ego piece that I find that my kids just don't have. Mm-hmm. Like, I really did have to think of it like I'm just pivoting, like I'm just shifting my direction a bit so that I can still take the pieces that I love and incorporate some new pieces and then be on this different path. And then as I'm like reading your book in this section about quitting, I'm like, yeah, that could be described as quitting. But my ego, like I showed up with my ego, and I wasn't prepared to bring that word to the table, I think, at that point. But now that I've like changed my relationship to that word, I wouldn't be triggered by it.
Oh, that's so true though, right? I know. And that is a huge piece of the work, is separating yourself from the way other people judge you. Another school filter, right? Because we are just so used to being judged and measured, and accepting that is okay, and feeling like we need to make other people happy.
Yeah, so true. Well, and when we are feeling triggered, that is an invitation to stare into the discomfort without judgment and get to know it better. And only through knowing something can you shift your relationship with it. And one example you talk about in the book, and that I encounter a lot in my coaching with families, is around integration. There's this mainstream truth of quote unquote truth of compartmentalization, especially for women, wherein we cannot be our whole integrated selves in any one role. And Cassidy and I talk about this in episode 3 as I issued a battle cry for integration. So I help families creatively meet everyone's needs while in connection, which really elevates the peace and the joy and the fulfillment that everyone can experience on the unschooling path. And can you talk about sitting with discomfort and that example, which you cover in the book? I'm hoping you can touch on that example specifically.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that was a really big one for me. And just in general, I mean, the phrase right there, sitting with discomfort, it's not easy.
Yeah, but it's uncomfortable.
It's really uncomfortable. And we're so used to trying to push that away, right? That's wrong. If something's uncomfortable, that means it's wrong. And we're wrong. And then we feel shame. But anyway.
And run away.
It is so valuable for helping us find our way through our fears. Because when we're scared, right, so often that first temptation is to blame the person or the thing that brought that fear into our lives. And then either try to fight it or run the other way. That fight or flight response. But we don't learn much with either of those instinctive reactions. So if the same issue comes up again in the future, we're going to have that same fear response over and over. Yeah. Now, Pam Laricchia says it really well in her book, The Wisdom of No Escape. She writes, "Our neurosis and our wisdom are made out of the same material. If you throw out your neurosis, you also throw out your wisdom." So we gain little wisdom if we run away from our neurosis. Instead,
there is no growth in comfort. I think that's something that as a helper of families that I couldn't even count how many times I've said that, there's no growth in comfort.
That is a beautiful way to put it. That is the meat of it right there. So you were talking about the example that I shared in the book, because I remember that one so clearly, because I was always getting this conventional advice when the kids were younger to take time for myself. Yes. And they meant away from my kids, right? Yes. You hear that all the time. Don't forget to take time for yourself. And that one made me so uncomfortable every time I heard it. But you know what? Yeah. I wasn't sure why, right? I wasn't sure until, and I kept just kind of ignoring it. Well, I'm not going to do that. Well, I'm not going to do that because I'm not comfortable, but I don't know why yet. Yeah. So it kept coming up, right? Every time it came up, I felt uncomfortable. So it's like, okay, I'm ready to sit with this for a while and try and figure this out so I don't get that feeling every time it comes up. So I knew that keeping up with 3 kids, 10 and under, felt exhausting. I knew that. And yet, if I ever mentioned that to my friends or family, the only solution, so this is my first year or two of unschooling, right? The only solution offered to me was to insist that I take that time for myself because I deserved it. And then if they went a step further, it was, well, send the kids back to school so you can have more time.
Yeah. So
as I was sitting with that, I was digging deeper into my thoughts and my feelings. I just keep asking myself questions, because in your head, you can answer anything. It's okay, right? Mm-hmm. It's okay. Whatever you're thinking or feeling, it's valid because it's yours. And I just keep asking myself, why? So eventually this bubbled up. I thought, I feel like a mom all the time and don't have time to be me. And then I thought about that. So it made me ask more questions. I'm like, well, why are mom and me different things?
There we have it. Yes.
Really thinking of myself as a different person when I'm with my kids. Does that mean, to me, mother is a role that I'm playing? So I was going around and around. So that's that compartmentalization you were talking about, right? Yeah. Am I breaking out me from mother? So as I played around with those questions, I came to realize that I truly didn't want to be a parent who felt like she needed to escape her kids to be her true self. These are not right, wrong questions. These are who's the parent that I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? It's about figuring out yourself, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to be myself, even when I was with my kids. So being a mother isn't a role I'm playing when the kids are around. I want mother to be an integral part of me.
Yeah, it's not a job that you need time off of.
Exactly.
It's like, when does my shift end so that my real life can begin and so that I can be my real self?
Exactly. And so that you're looking forward, that pulls you even further away from your kids, right? Because you're just looking forward to that escape, looking forward to that escape. So what I figured out there was that piece of advice that wasn't serving me, the little neurosis piece that I had finally untangled the wisdom from and I could let go of, was the idea that I need time without my kids to be myself and meet my needs.
Yes.
That idea was not serving me at all.
Yes. And it's such a common it's a common piece of baggage that people bring to the table. And like you said, that's really the societal message that you get, that being a parent is a burdensome, thankless, unfulfilling job because we don't value any sort of caretaking. And you can only be your true, fulfilled, authentic best self outside of that. And so a lot of people, specifically women, spend a lot of time and energy sort of maintaining that wall in between those walls, in between their different selves. You know, I'm a lawyer here, I'm a mother here, I'm a wife here, I'm a friend here, and all of these different things shall never meet. And I have not met a single person who could be happy and fulfilled in their best self, living their best life, boxed up like that.
Being a whole bunch of different me's.
Yeah, being a whole bunch of different, all things to all people separately.
Exactly.
I've not met a single person who could, elevate to the place where they have the potential to elevate, stuck in boxes. We just can't do it. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and the great thing with that is when it's not even something to aspire to.
No.
Because when you realize and decide to be yourself, your full you in all of those situations, it's amazing what a difference that makes. Like, you're bringing your full self into each of those moments, and all of a sudden you're empowered. So many more possibilities open up. You are more directly engaged. Half your brain isn't thinking about your 3 other roles that you have to do in,
everything
3 hours
and
from now.
everyone benefits. My kids benefit when I show up to my integrated life with all of the parts of me present. They benefit from that. They learn more from that. They're happier from that. I learn more from that. I'm happy. My clients learn more from that. They're happy. My husband, all these different pieces, like society, they all benefit when we all when we show up with our whole selves.
And what I just loved is once I was able to do that, I found so many reasons why I wanted to be with my kids, why I wanted to get down on the floor and play with them, why I wanted to take them out on adventures. I embrace those activities as my own now. It wasn't, I'm doing this for my kids. It was, we're doing this.
Yes.
That made such a huge difference in my days. And then I also started looking for ways to share and nurture those other aspects of myself while I was with my children. Like you said, they see more of us. They see us fully. Maybe sometimes it was me suggesting puzzle games, which are my favorite too, right? I'm part of the mix. Maybe when they're engaged playing, I grab one of my magazines and I sit nearby and I'm reading that while they play. They see me pursuing my interests too. It's not just something for kids. It's for human beings. Yes. We live and learn all together. That revelation, it made such a huge difference in our days and our lives. It was beautiful.
Yeah, that's massive. That's a huge, massive, massive piece. That shift from I have a job of meeting my kids' needs and doing everything that they want and need to do. This shift to honoring everyone's needs creatively while in connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We're all, as a whole family, we all have needs and we're going to honor them all. And that can be done with just a little bit of creativity. So you talked in the book about our struggle with feeling like we need approval, feeling like we need to be right, and genuinely accepting others. Why do you think that's so hard?
Well, I think that's just another big deschooling step away from the schoolish mindset. Because when growing up, so many of us were taught that everything and everyone is to be measured. And the tools to manage that are judgment, blame, and shame, right? School sets everyone up in competition with each other. Almost every act and answer we give is graded and compared to everyone else. And soon, even just making a mistake, let alone being wrong, makes us feel so ashamed. And then our parents likely reinforce that atmosphere at home. They're trying to be helpful. They want you to succeed. They reward good grades and good behavior, and they shame us for anything that they judge unacceptable. So from a very early age, either we adopt that framework that we're living in and chase approval from teachers and parents, or we rebel and are regularly shamed and labeled and just know that we're wrong. So even as adults, it's hard for us to escape that whole judgmental ethos in which we grew up, both the struggle to get others' approval and the urge to judge others by our yardstick, right? It goes both ways because we have this ingrained in us after years of reinforcement. So I think that's why it is such a big struggle for us. It's, again, something that we need to drop entirely, that beginner's mindset, and try to rebuild a framework that makes more sense to us, that fits more with the way we want to see the world, with the way we are going to differently define success rather than the conventional markers, of graduation in college and, 9-to-5 job at one company forever. It's just not working anymore. But, when you start to look at it, you realize why it also may not be what you aspire to for yourself or for your children. And is there a different path, a different way that you can relate and connect to the people in your lives beyond this? This one is basically all power-based, right?
Yeah.
Judging, power over, blaming others, shaming others. Is there another way to be in relationship with people? But that's why it's such a struggle for us, because it's something that most of us grew up with for many years. So it is so ingrained in our psyche almost.
Yeah, I definitely launched with an approval deficit and a rightness standard. From just school and the way that most of us were raised. And so that was always a big struggle for me, for sure. So reading the way that you tumble around with that in your book I think it's really, really important, because that's one of those things too, I think, that a lot of people aren't aware of. It's like an issue that they have that they haven't yet seen. Like no one's ever really shown a light on it. And oftentimes we can walk around feeling unhappy or unfulfilled, and we can't quite find why. And this is one of the things to shine a light on, to investigate, for sure. Like it's really uncomfortable to lean into it and to look at these bits, but it can be really powerful, and you can get a lot of positive movement in your growth if you are brave enough to do that. And there's one thing I wanted to touch on with this one too, and this is the judgment piece. I think that genuinely, like through and through, accepting others right where they are for exactly who they are is hugely powerful. I also think that we have a big aversion to the word judgment, but it can be helpful in the sense of a process that happens within yourself. For example, when I observe another family on the playground, especially during my deschooling process or during my initial reckoning when I shifted into attachment parenting, I would see other families doing things and I would feel something in myself that you could definitely call judgment, where I would think, oh, that doesn't feel right for me. So that's not the path I'm going to take. So let me look a little bit, to the left of that. And then I'd observe another family, that's sort of in that space. And I would feel out like, oh, I want to do a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that. And you can use the word judgment to label that process of observing things in other people and having a feeling about it and using that feeling to give you direction for growth.
I think that's exploring our world. That's exploring who we want to be, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing different things out and about. Wherever too, right? Wherever you're thinking about it, whatever issue, I guess, for lack of a better word. But, what kind of a parent do I want to be in these kinds of situations? What do I think would be a good way to react? And then you see all sorts of examples around you, and you see the implication. It depends on how well you know them too, whether or not you see the implications. You don't know if that's something that always happens, if this is a bad moment, but still these are examples that we can take in. That's like the whole gathering information phase, right?
Yeah. And I think that what you're talking about with this, the need for approval and the feeling the need to be right and the genuinely accepting is that we can look to other people and take in information and be aware of how we're feeling about it and use that to guide our movement forward, while also not feeling like my way is the right way and what they're doing is wrong and I need to fix them.
Mm-hmm. Because they're on their journey, right?
Yeah.
Even if you were to go and in the most nicest way say something that you think would add value to them, if they're not in the place, when we were talking about learning before and our children, and for something to make sense, it needs to connect with them where they are. If they're not in that place yet on their journey, it's not going to make sense to them. No. Right? One thing I love about being out and about in the world is just planting just these little seeds that there are different ways.
I was giddy when I saw that you used that expression in your book, because I use that expression in all of my books. I totally talk about that if you have this desire to change the world for the better, and put more love in the world and more acceptance and shift some things to make the world better for children, the best thing you can do is not tell parents that what they're doing is wrong and here's how to fix it, but to live your best life, letting your light shine for other people to see. And through that, you are planting seeds in other people's minds that may sprout right away, or they may never bloom, or a year later something else might water it and that seed will bloom. So I've found that metaphor to be so perfect, and it's something that I hold very dearly in my work, especially like the advocacy work I do. I see what I do as planting seeds. So I loved that you used that metaphor. I was all excited when I read that.
Because they need to be curious, right?
Yes.
Before they can learn a new way of doing something, they need to be curious about even that seed, that there is a different way. If it gets watered into that curiosity for them to start exploring a different path or a different way for them. But until they're at that point, they are where they are. And
it has to be relevant for them, just like we're talking about with our kids. If they don't yet have that space, if they haven't yet recognized the space of understanding in their minds that connects to all these other things in this web, then they're not ready for it. There's not a space for it. But you can just plant those seeds, just like I do with my children, expose them to new experiences and new ideas. And sometimes they just take off with it. And other times, a year and a half later, they'll take off with it. And I'll think to myself, I can't believe you even remember that. And they, but I'm just planting those seeds, and I have no attachment to the outcome in terms of, seeing that immediate result or testing.
Because attachment to that seed blooming would make us feel resentful if it doesn't.
Yes,
right?
That's not mine. That's their piece.
Exactly.
My role is to extend these invitations, to plant these seeds, and whatever my children do with them and whatever it looks like in their garden, that's just for me to appreciate.
Yep. Beautiful. I love that garden analogy. The whole thing works.
So one of the common misconceptions about homeschooling is that we are isolating and sheltering our children, but it's actually the exact opposite. We are living our lives every day in the current of the real world. One of the challenges of walking a journey off the mainstream path is in living and hopefully thriving within mainstream society. So what wisdom do you have to share for unschooling families navigating that space?
I love that question too. And when we began deschooling, we naturally cocooned for a good while. We spent a lot of time in our basement playing. The kids were just playing to their heart's content, and I was watching them and learning so much. And I think that's a really natural thing for the beginning of deschooling, because it helps us when we're extra vulnerable to comments and judgment from others, right? Because we don't yet know. We've released. It's kind of like we've taken off our shell, but we don't yet quite know what we're replacing it with. And that doesn't mean that we don't go out and about in the world, but more often we're doing that within our family, right? We all go to the park, or we all go here and there. We can stay in our cocoon even as we go places. But eventually we become much more comfortable just being ourselves, as we were talking about before, being our full selves, even out and about in that mainstream world. So what I found helpful when we were going places that had maybe a more conventional atmosphere and expectations was just to chat with my children before we went, so that I could let them know what to expect, and we could talk about plans on how we could have fun and accomplish the things that we wanted to within any constraints of that situation, right? And then another really important piece is after we chat again about how things went. What worked, what didn't work, what we might do next time, what parts we enjoyed, what we didn't. There is just so much rich fodder for conversation there. And it's not like these have to be big sit down conversations, right? They can come up here, an observation here, an observation there, a couple of minutes, they just weave into our lives. It's all about sharing information about the world and exploring the ways that we most comfortably mesh with it, really. Mm-hmm. An example I shared, and it was something, that personally for us was something that we worked on, was visits with extended family. So I would let the kids know ahead of time of any expectations. It could just be Sunday lunch, or it could be a wedding, it could be a picnic. Those all have different kinds of flow and different kinds of expectations. And it's not about framing the expectations in a negative way. Oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. Let's figure out how you can do those things. It's about sharing the information behind that. Why did they do this? Why is that important to them?
These are the answers to the quizzes they're going to give you. No, I'm
exactly. So there's so much you can figure out, right? So if a meal is an important part of it, right? Because, from my husband's family was Italian.
Yummy.
So that was a big part of it. So, and they would have a time. They would know the time. And we would know ourselves. We know how often we get hungry. So we can figure out a way to figure out food around that. That's not a big deal. And when we get there, I would keep them in the loop of things so that they'd know, lunch is on time and it's going to be right in about 10 minutes. And I'd go, hang with them and help them transition to that. If food was delayed, I could go and, say, hey, I know it's going to be a bit late. Kids are going to be hungry. I can grab a little snack for them. I can help navigate all that stuff. The other thing we did was bring toys and games so that we had fun things to do. You know, it wasn't showing up at a place and expecting the kids to entertain themselves. We brought stuff. We made our own fun. We enjoyed ourselves. And I often hung out with the kids because that's where lots of fun was happening.
Yeah. Because we like our kids.
Exactly. And, you know, it is more fun often to be playing games and sitting around chatting about who did what.
So true.
And the other thing we would do is, as you alluded to there, we'd chat about typical questions that might come up, right? And conversation topics like, you know, just say, hey, remember Grams went here last month? We can ask her about her trip. You know, we would know we would talk about and get to recognize tones of voices when things were coming and what to say, you know, I need to go to the bathroom, or, you know, ways to get out of them. And I would, if there were, you know, certain people who were more apt to do that kind of uncomfortable quizzing, I would hang out by my kids.
Yep.
I would especially watch for when they were near that person so I could hang out and help if things started to go sideways, you know, catch these things before they happen. And we'd have that plan worked out ahead of time. And I would ask them how much they wanted me to be involved, right? So maybe they were feeling like they wanted to chat and they were having fun. But maybe they're like, you know what, I don't want to get in a conversation with that person this time. And I would help them manage that. Yeah. It's the same deal when we went out to parks and attractions. It's all about just chatting about what we might encounter there, what we wanted to do, how long we might want to stay. Just, you know, taking everyone's, you know, back to taking their needs into consideration, right? And how we can accomplish what it is that we're wanting to do. It does take extra time and effort, but it is so helpful to set up our trips out and about for success, because they went so much more smoothly. We had so much more fun. And you know what? The skills they learned through our conversations, they take that forward. And I see them doing that, you know, now as young adults with their friends and organizing. And it's a skill that not a lot of kids have the time to develop, you know, when they're going to school, because they're just told you're doing this, you're doing that, and they don't get to negotiate at all. And so often I see that with other young adults. They're stuck. They either do it or they don't do it. They can't manage things to make the most of the situation, to figure out ways to mesh and enjoy themselves when they're out and about in the world. So it's just something that's been so fascinating and so helpful and worth the time and energy to do.
And I've found it so similar to, I know a lot of sage families and natural parenting families and all the kind of awesome people who listen who are listening to us chat came to unschooling through attachment parenting. And I found such a parallel between when we shifted into attachment parenting and in giving birth to my first child, having that initial, I sometimes refer to it as the baby moon, but having that initial period of time to sort of cocoon and get to know this new way of life and get to know this person in this new way, and to get to know yourself a little bit better and get sort of your sea legs under you. And as I was reading through your period of when you first shifted to unschooling, I was really reminded of, again, that parallel where we have this reckoning and then we go through this cocooning process and then we start to move out into society more and more. And I think there's this one other piece that I wanted to bring to the conversation, which was of boundaries and sort of being an advocate for your children. And I know you talk about it in like a really nice, polite way. And I would say I'm probably a little bit less polite. For example, we were at the dentist the other day getting some dental stuff done, and there's this person who works at the dentist's office who is so wonderful and kind, and my kids love her, and she always asks me when we come in what my children are learning in their homeschool curriculum right now. And this particular day, like, I was getting stuff done on my teeth and I was already feeling anxious, and I just looked at her and said, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to dive into a conversation about homeschool learning right now, so we'll have to have this conversation next time. Like, I have no problem being blunt in my boundaries.
Oh man, that reminds me of so many times. But that was one of the things too, right? Like when my youngest has type 1 diabetes, right? So we have quarterly appointments at the clinic, like since he was, I don't know, 9 or whatever. And it would always be, so what are we going to answer today?
Yes, and I usually
like the first couple of times you go into it, and then after that, it's like, well, are you going to have the summer off? And he's just like, nope.
Yes. Oh my gosh, all the questions. And I think that it's really good for our kids too. Again, in living this, in being your best self and living your best life in connection, that when I have tough conversations too, my kids are present. Like, and in the earlier phase of parenting, it was around things like breastfeeding. If I were breastfeeding in public, my toddler, and people would say something, I would have no problem being assertive and establishing boundaries. And I think that that's so valuable for our kids too. Like you said, them being able to navigate these delicate, sometimes social interactions is so valuable. And they see me doing that, and I help them doing that also. And I think there's so much value in that. And that's something that a lot of adults struggle with. They have a really hard time with boundaries. And so again, if you feel uncomfortable in those situations, like we talked about, discomfort is an invitation to lean in. So if you're feeling that discomfort, lean into it. Maybe you were really disempowered in your childhood and really shamed and discouraged from setting the boundaries that you needed for yourself, and your needs weren't met. And so being given the opportunity to then lean into that discomfort and grow in that way through advocating for your children, I see as a tremendous gift.
Oh, I just love that. And I love that you brought that up, because that is all part of those conversations too, beforehand with your kids, right? Yeah. Because they know, like, if they've been in that situation, they're like, no, I don't want to talk to this person. Or if this happens, I'm not okay with that, and then it's like, okay, no problem. I will help you maintain that boundary. Yeah. Right. So often it was, for a while it was, we would walk in for Sunday lunch and I would say, we're leaving right after we eat. Mm-hmm. And that was just it. You see, that was one huge thing too, when we went into those situations, was to go in empowered. And sometimes that took energy, right? Beforehand to build up. But it was in those moments, in those situations, I'm going to have that power for my children. And I am going to show them that there's nothing wrong with their boundaries, right? Yeah. If one, if sometimes they always wanted, a hug when kids first got there, if my kids weren't comfortable with that, they said, and, we talked about this, they said, I don't want to hug when we go in. Yeah. Maybe I had the child in my hand, in my arms. So I was holding them, and I would hug the other person, or I would just say, oh, no, we're busy, and off we go, do something else. But all those things come up in our conversations, right?
Yeah. And if you're holding your child and you're saying, and you look at your child's face as the relative is extending their arms, and then you look back at the relative, you look at your child and you say, no hug today, and they'll sort of shake their head, and then you look back at the relative and say, oh, no hug today, maybe later. Yep. And that in and of itself, so much learning in that, and so much empowerment in that. I think that I don't want my kids to be afraid to go out in the world and reach for whatever it is they're reaching for. And I think that for a lot of people nowadays, and understandably so, they struggle with that. especially if they have anything that that sticks out of the mold in any way, if that makes sense.
Because these conversations aren't about trying to figure out a way to fit in.
No.
They're about trying to find all the ways we can empower ourselves to enjoy ourselves in the world.
Yes. I want to celebrate the
There's
diversity.
so many ways.
Yes. And I want my kids to be empowered with everything that they would need to navigate the world in a way that celebrates their diversity. And if they encounter people or systems who don't align with that same view, to be able to advocate for themselves and set boundaries and communicate respectfully yet effectively and oftentimes assertively in order to get their needs met, such that they can still are empowered with their right to exist in public space, even if they look different from mainstream people.
Exactly. And this is what we're helping them figure out by doing it with them.
Yes. Yes.
It's so beautiful.
Yes, there's that mainstream, educational and parenting notion that, in order to swim, you have to throw them in the deep end. But that's actually not how learning. That's not what learning has to look like. And you can do it through connection, like we're talking about here. If you have something important that you see your children potentially having a need to learn, then you can do that through connection. And that's the best way to learn. They get to see you doing it first, while they're observing. And then the more skilled they become at it, the more active their role in that. And then pretty soon you're the one observing while they're the ones doing it.
Exactly. Seeing them out and about doing those things is amazing. And I wanted to tie this all back to, let's get back to children as guides. You said,
yes,
they think that the only way for a kid to learn something hard is to force them to do it, to throw them in the deep end, right?
Yeah.
Or else they won't do those hard things if you're, in connection with them, in relationship with them, and not pushing them to do these hard things. When you sit back a little bit, take that time to observe your children on their timetable, you will see them learning and doing all those hard things for their own reasons. There's real reasons to do these things, not because you want them to.
Yes, it's so, so, so true. And just even tying it into that whole being your whole self, that, and your children having this power of learning and growth through that. I mean, there was an experience I had where I had to put on this big press conference in front of like a dozen different live media outlets about to advocate for my child's right to breastfeed in this school setting. And even still, from time to time, my kids will Google one of those videos and pull them up on YouTube. And for me, it seems like for no reason at all. But then, maybe a couple of weeks later, they'll bring something up that they were worried about. And, just in working really hard to be your best self and to try and make the world a better place in your little way, that special gift that you have that allows you to be able to do that. Your kids are influenced by that because you're living in connection and they're witnessing that. And then in the same way, it's reciprocal. Like in them growing into their best self, I get inspired and I get informed and I learn a lot too.
It is. It's just this back and forth growth and connection. That's beautiful. We are all better people for it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
I
dance.
am such a better person for having known my children.
Yes.
As real people, not just as, these little blobs that I needed to mold.
Empty vessels.
Yeah.
So I posted in my Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook that we were going to chat about deschooling today and asked if they had any questions about it. And Mandy wants to know how long it's going to take.
I love that question. I really do. And I know there's a guideline of about a month for every year of school. What that means, though, is that parents need a lot more deschooling than any of their children who are
So
leaving
much,
school.
yes. Yes.
And you know what? That's a great place to start, because for parents, it usually works out to at least a year, right? And if they make a concerted effort to deschool and learn the ins and outs of unschooling, a year definitely has the potential to make a huge difference in their lives. Enough of a difference that they're going to want to keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the really cool thing about deschooling, I think, is that once you get far enough along, like maybe that year, you will stop wondering when it's done. It won't be a destination any longer. You'll just be living your lives, right? I mean, maybe one day you'll think, I haven't worried about whether my kids are learning enough for a while now. Cool. You're going to notice that you've moved past that, but it's not going to be, a destination on your path that you're going to run through the tape and cheer. And
that in and of itself is part of that schooling mindset and part of the deschooling work, that we have this notion in mind that we graduate. There's this graduation where we've learned everything and now we're done. And
exactly. So if someone asks, are we done yet? I think the answer is probably
am I dead?
No.
Yeah. Unless I'm dead, I'm not done.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's the other thing you come to realize, right? Is that as your kids get older, new situations are going to come up, and you may hit pockets of conventional wisdom that you just haven't had a reason to question yet. They haven't come up. So in that sense, deschooling is never done. It's life. It's living.
Yes.
Shit happens.
Yes, I completely agree. And especially when we were raised in this way, I often talk about how the way that there are certain parts about the way you are raised that builds the framework and the physiological structure in your brain, especially around connection. And so for those of us who were in school at a very young age for long periods of time, that's something that is there in a very deep and pervasive way.
Deep.
So if who you are is a skyscraper, those initial beams that were put in the concrete footings, that's not something that in a few months' time is going to be reframed per se. So it really is a lifelong process. I mean, I live and breathe and feel through and through this parenting approach and learning approach that I take, obviously. And hopefully people can, that comes across. However, I still absolutely have moments where these assumptions, I butt up against these assumptions and feel a dissonance and feel a discomfort, and I have to lean into it. And I mean, this happens once a day.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and I love that. That means I'm alive. That means that I am growing and learning. And the day I feel like I have nothing left to learn is the day that I'm dead, because that's just not human beings' work. You live and you grow and you learn your whole life.
I keep trying to tell myself now, if you ever think you know everything, stop.
Throw in the towel. That's the time to walk away.
Exactly.
Okay. So now we're going to move into a day in the life. And before I ask you about your day, I just have to say, I'm sitting down here we usually call this space the rec room. And there's this home office space. And it looks out. I have this sliding glass door and these huge windows over Puget Sound. And there are all these trees. And there's an eagle. There's this eagle, couple eagle who lives in one of these trees, and they're sitting there perched, and the snow is just so gently falling, and the house is still quiet because we're not morning people, so my kids are upstairs sort of moving through their stuff quietly. I'm 99% sure they're all snuggled in the bed together, and I'm sitting here talking to my friend Pam about something I'm totally passionate about, and it's this beautiful, beautiful moment that I just wish I could visually bring everybody here. But so for you, I want you to describe your favorite day this week and share with us why you loved it. And the reason I do this segment is I want to give people a snapshot into what it looks like for different families to be living these values that we talk about. And like you were talking about, the hero's journey of 1,000 different faces, like to give people a chance to see what that hero's journey looks like with some different faces.
Oh, absolutely. I loved this question. And now that my kids are all older, I at first I was thinking, well, I could talk about a favorite day when they were younger, so there would be more family, more in the moment of unschooling.
No, but I want your truth.
Yeah, I thought it would be very nice to share what life with unschooled young adults can look like, right?
Yes.
So what I love most about my days is that I'm doing work that I love, and that the connections with my children continue to weave through my days. So my eldest Joseph, he lives at home and is pursuing his passion for stories and writing from here. And he helps us with projects around the house and on our 5-acre property. And a few times a week, we catch up with each other. So often it's in the kitchen, and we'll talk about all things story and character. And the depth of his understanding still blows me away. And I love that he enjoys sharing what he's reading and watching and taking it all apart with me. Now, I was thinking about it for this, and I think our conversations would be hilarious for other people to watch. As we get so excited to share like the next connection that pops up and the next, and we're like we're both
animated.
Sometimes we've been like, okay, nope, don't interrupt me. I got to finish my thought. and like my hand is jumping up and I'm like jumping up and down. No, I got to share something. I got to share.
I love that.
I mean, the other night I was making pizzas and we happily chatted for like 2 hours straight in the kitchen. Just
Beautiful.
On and on, just the next thing and the next thing. Now, my daughter, Lissy, is a photographer, and she moved to New York City to pursue her passion just a couple of months after turning 18. And she's been living there pretty much ever since. She comes home to visit a couple times a year, and we love visiting her. It's great to have a place to stay in New York City.
Nice.
Now, my office is in her bedroom, so I'm surrounded by fun little reminders of her every day.
Aww.
And we text each other at least a few times a week, sharing random notes and observations, just like fun connecting things with no expectation of an immediate reply.
Yeah.
So the conversation flows through our days whenever we have a moment to give it our attention and joy. And they're always filled with exclamation marks and lots of emojis. And, so let's focus on this week. This week I was texting her because I had checked the status of a package that I sent her. It was something we gave her for Christmas. But it was too big for her to carry with her flying back home. And then she went to LA for a month because she works in LA too, a couple times a year now. She goes out for a month and a half. And works there as well. Anyway, so I know she just got back and I knew she was looking forward to that. So, I checked the status of it and just texted her, said, oh, it's in Chicago now and it should be there such and such time. So, just little bits of our lives. And when she was home at Christmas, she was watching Gilmore Girls.
Oh, I love that. I love Gilmore Girls.
Okay, yeah, I'm just about finished season 6. So I started watching it with her then, and now, like every time I start a new season, I'm on this season, and we're just texting back and forth about that. And then FaceTime is always fun for longer conversations and to see each other's smiling, happy faces. But that's how she weaves in to my life. And my youngest, Michael, lives at home, and he works full-time as a stunt performer. So he's a knight at medieval times and drives into the city about an hour, 5 or 6 days a week. So his love of stunt work grew out of his interest in karate, and it's been so fascinating to watch that unfold over the years. Now, his hours vary widely based on the performance season, so we keep track of his hours on our big kitchen calendar. I think we were talking about calendars before when you were on my podcast.
Yes.
So when he wakes up, we check in with each other. Like this morning, when he got up, he told me about the concert that he went to last night after work, and I told him about this podcast call coming up. And then most days I will take a break before he needs to leave and put together a lunch for him. Though if he's busy, he takes care of it. It's a gift that I love to give to him. It's not an expectation. It's just a really fun thing that we enjoy, that I enjoy. And then I'll hang around to say goodbye. And I love that every time he leaves, he always comes and gives me a big hug and a kiss on his way out. And we wish each other a great day.
I love it.
Yeah, we have great and fun vacations and adventures together, but that's what I love about our everyday, how these connections with my children just continue to flow through our days. We stay connected, we keep joy as our compass, and we have fun weaving our lives together.
Yeah.
I love it.
I love it. And I love you were able to bring that perspective of what it looks like, sort of in the next season of life when your kids aren't completely dependent upon you in the same way that they are when they're younger. So thank you for that.
Makes sense.
Now, what is your favorite resource for families to learn more about deschooling?
This was a hard question. I mean, when I started back in 2002, there was not a lot of resources, but nowadays there are quite a few blogs and websites and books and stuff. So it can take some time to sort through them, but I do think that's a valuable part of the process because the good resources are the ones that resonate with you and that encourage you to ask questions and encourage you to think for yourself. Because
that's why it's called the dive deeper, the deep dive segment. Because we are inviting you to dive deeper.
Exactly. Deschooling is such an important process. If you don't come to deeply understand how unschooling works, you won't be able to sustain a supportive and thriving learning environment for your children, right? So, I love all the work that you've been doing. I really enjoyed your Sage homeschooling book. There are some really fun blogs. You had Jo on the podcast, Her Girls Unschooled, right? Her blog as well. There are a lot of great blogs out there. Just come at it with that open and curious mindset. But again, you can use the word judgment, if that's the way you want to think about it. But bring your intelligence to it. Look at the kind of information. Does it make sense to you? Is it encouraging? Does the way they share the information resonate with you so that it inspires you to keep going? Because stopping at any point in this journey, you're not going to get to the, as Joseph Campbell calls it, the ultimate boon, of unschooling with confidence and with grace. If you get waylaid for too long, because your kids are going to keep growing day after day. It's not something, that you can wait 10 years before you kind of move on to the next stage. You can, and it probably happens, but the more determination maybe that you can bring to it, and that inspiration helps for that. When you resonate with the way someone describes things, the way they talk about things, and they are addressing the kinds of questions that you have on your journey, that is a great resource for you. And it may differ. For me, my stuff is a great resource because it comes from my perspective, right? So it's the way it makes sense to me. But I don't presume that it makes sense that way to everyone. It may be very helpful for some people. But there are all sorts of voices out there, and find the ones that work well for you, the ones that help you understand things better, the ones that inspire you to keep going. So.
Well, I definitely invite you to read Pam's book, The Unschooling Journey, a field guide, which in addition to being a breathtakingly beautiful literary piece, is full of the sweetest illustrations, lined pages, and open space to act as a journal-style experience. And I also recommend adding her Exploring Unschooling podcast to your list.